concerned animal lovers from surrounding areas and individuals acquainted with the rocky coastline began to assemble close to the rescue site, while others watched anxiously as the veteran squad worked, posted updates, and rallied support for the small creature's rehabilitation on social media. And the tale soon gained traction. Public awareness, what at first seemed to be a terrible experience with nature, was turning into a story about Bailey and tenacity in the midst of the chaos. Local marine biologist Dr. Mark Thompson showed up. Dr. Thompson, a specialist in coastal ecosystems, was on the scene and had spent years researching how marine life affects wildlife on land. He noted the circumstances that resulted in the puppy's wounds, including the thick buildup of barnacles on the surrounding rocks and the peculiar parasite growth that is probably related to the recent tidal pattern alterations. These are not frequent events in this region, he told a reporter on the scene. It seems that environmental circumstances have changed, resulting in a confluence of circumstances that put this animal in jeopardy. Sites gave the developing narrative a scientific dimension, bridging the gap between a medical rescue and more general ecological. Returning to the rescue unit, as the veterinary operations proceeded, the air became tense with expectation as the puppy, while being in obvious discomfort, displayed signs of calm fortitude. Dr. Carter observed that its eyes, despite their weight, gleamed with a determined gleam. She smiled broadly and told her helper that this young child had a special quality. Even in its anguish, there's an indisputable glimmer of life that seems to be struggling with each. These remarks struck a chord with the crew, strengthening their determination to give the puppy everything it had in order to live. Lisa, one of the younger technicians, meticulously documented every opportunity for recuperation during a brief lull in the process. She recorded every detail, including the quantity and location of barnacles removed, in a log. The puppy's reactions at every stage and the chemical treatment concentration are carefully monitored. Notes were meant to be a useful resource for rescue operations in the future, as well as for the current situation. Similar situations, the cooperation between veterinarians and Dr. Thompson and other environmental scientists emphasized the need for interdisciplinary cooperation to handle a scenario as complicated as the ongoing tension from the emergency treatments. The initial prognosis had been grim, but there were hints of improvement that eventually emerged. The puppy's eyes, which had been dull with anguish, began to brighten and its heart rate normalized, to gradually improve following each treatment session. Motivated by these little successes, Dr. Carter made adjustments. The goal of the treatment strategy is to increase the animal's general strength by specific diet and mild. Dr. Carter left the mobile home to provide physiotherapy in a peaceful setting away from the controlled chaos of the rescue. Standing on the rocky shoreline for a breath of fresh sea air, she looked out at the turbulent waves and nature can be cruel, and the rocky coastline serves as a clear reminder of the forces that nearly destroyed this delicate life. She believed that miracles might occasionally occur in the midst of destruction, so she went back to her colleagues with. As night fell once more, renewed energy was prepared to do everything in its power to reverse the tide in the puppy's favor. With each step, the rescue team was ready to transfer the puppy to a more secure and regulated setting for further recovery. Knowing that the fight against the environmental and physical scars was far from over, they continued to be vigilant. However, despite the difficulties, there was a growing sense of hope and conviction that the puppy's recovery from the injury too. In the coming hours and days, a possible recovery would show results that no one could have foreseen. The rescue situation at the rocky coastline expanded into a frenzy of action and new developments after the emergency treatment. Difficulties as Emily Carter and her group kept an eye on the puppies. Recuperation, a number of disputes and exchanges started to surface, suggesting deeper issues that would influence how the story unfolded, including the puppy's shocking state and following the rescue. Word quickly traveled via social media and local media as when online updates received thousands of views, worried residents started to comment with ideas and requests for responses. Some viewers asked how environmental conditions had caused such a strange barnacle outbreak and parasites, while some praised the hardworking rescue team. Social media discussions sparked intense Local environmental activist conversations around climate change, coastal pollution, and the condition of marine ecosystems. After noticing, organizations began planning demonstrations calling for more stringent regulations on coastal industries. Groups contended that the puppies' injuries were caused by the unforgiving surroundings, which were indicative of bigger environmental problems that needed immediate addressing while at the rescue. Unit Dr. Carter had to deal with personal issues, even though remain. While attention was still on preserving the dog, practical problems quickly surfaced, requiring the use of sensitive chemical treatments too. Supply of the barnacles was restricted, and some of the specialty drugs were becoming low because unexpected demand. Hospital managers became more worried about how to allocate resources, worried that focusing too much on this well-known case could take money away from other urgent needs. During a heated discussion with hospital administration, Dr. Carter justified the significance of this rescue, not just as acting with compassion, but also serving as a warning about wider environmental risks. Protecting this dog is about more than just one. Primarily, she said, it's about bringing attention to the hazardous conditions threatening our wildlife and coasts. Her passionate remarks caused conflict, even if they were positively welcomed by some. The distribution of scarce resources outside the hospital was questioned by cost-conscious managers. Both local officials and medical professionals continue to take notice of the puppy's health. Dr. Mark, the marine biologist Thompson, who had previously studied the barnacle clusters and tidal pools, now adopted a more active. Dr. Thompson started working with environmental agencies, gathering samples of the local water and sediment in an effort to ascertain whether a recent chemical release or an aberrant proliferation of parasites and barnacles was caused by an industrial mishap. His research meetings were held at. Both scholarly attention and community concern were drawn to the nearby university. He mentioned in one interview that the number of parasites and barnacles is unusual for this. We must take into account that, in the midst of these external factors, human activity may have upset the natural balance along this length of coastline. Dr. Carter started to feel the effects of a fresh, personal conflict while attending to because of the puppy's precarious condition, she began to receive anonymous emails from an organization known as the Coastal Guardians. The communications included both encouraging remarks and concerning cautions that raised doubts about whether the rescue was being utilized as a diversion from a more extensive covert industrial email. Read on to discover that the wounds you observe are only the start. Further exploration of the ocean will reveal proof that our shores are being manipulated for financial gain. These letters unnerved Dr. Carter and her staff as they raised the prospect that the environmental disaster might be connected to factors other than natural occurrences. As tension increased, intentional human intervention made the community's reaction even more. Some locals were incensed at the alleged carelessness of coastal. Businesses started holding public gatherings and beach cleanups to call for government responsibility at one such forum, acrimonious arguments erupted between industrial company officials and seasoned fishermen. The fishermen stated that their livelihoods had been lost and that they were in danger due to the worsening coastal conditions, marine life. But the business representatives contended that strict rules would endanger the economy. Stability. The confrontation between these interests created a new level of tension, requiring community leaders to act as a mediator between. Back at the rescue unit, environmental issues and economic realities. The puppy was sent to a specialized veterinary institution for long-term care after beginning to show faint signs of recovery. Dr. Carter kept a careful eye on its development, recording each advancement made by Bailey's in the publication of an extensive case study. But when the puppy's heart rate leveled off and its eyes started to, there was still a lingering sense of doubt about the treatment plan, which was initially hailed as. Peers began to scrutinize novel practices, questioning whether environmental factors could result in recurrent breakouts if not dealt with at the source. Rivera, the officer who first found the injured dog, persisted. His nocturnal excursions to the area were now accompanied by modest patrols with a renewed feeling of purpose. Reports of strange activity and mysterious figures close to the tidal pools. Unmarked vehicles were parked on the beach at peculiar hours, and local sellers were whispering to one another about weird events at the water's edge, and these insights strengthened his suspicion that he decided to collaborate closely with Dr. Thompson since there was more to the story than just a natural calamity. Environmental regulators to find any possible connections to industrial malfen in the local media, under the direction of Olivia Reed, who was becoming more and more inquisitive, started to piece together, combining the several stories into a vast, interwoven saga. Blog entries enhanced by community members, scientists, and hospital employees' interviews painted a picture of a community on the verge of social and ecological change, and her writing effectively conveyed the intricacy of the circumstance. A small puppy hurt by the weather had turned into the unlikely catalyst for a more thorough examination of corporate negligence and environmental misconduct as darkness descended once more across the rocky coastline. Dr. Carter, officer. In an unplanned meeting, Rivera and Dr. Thompson reviewed their findings using mountains of data photos. As witness accounts laid out on a worn table, they talked about the next actions we must take in order to follow every indication. Dr. Thompson asked whether we could make a clear relationship, no matter how tiny, between human activities and these environmental changes. We can not only save this puppy, but stop additional damage to our environment as a whole. Decision reverberated across the space, laying the groundwork for the investigation's subsequent phase, which promised to upend the fundamentals of community governance and local business. Just a startling turn of events occurred as Dr. Emily Carter's team was steadily stabilizing the injured dog. One clear dawn that would completely change their preconceived notions about the case. As he reassessed the rescue location along the rocky coastline, Dr. Carter observed an oddity on a seaweed and driftwood lodged in the uneven surface had partially covered the tide pool rock, which was a little metal capsule that has corroded and has a faded corporate mark that, after a quick search revealed that it belonged to one of the biggest chemical manufacturers. Were startled and curious, so Dr. Carter carefully took the capsule out. She found, with the assistance of a local materials specialist, that it had a number of sealed documents in a. The documents showed that a sample of a chemical residue that is not often present in natural coastal surroundings. At a nearby industrial plant, there was a recent unintentional spill that was discreetly covered up by the business, but the chemical examination of the residue was even more shocking. Displayed characteristics that could hasten the growth of aquatic organisms, such as parasite species and barnacles, distant, higher than usual. Dr. Carter's thoughts were racing with the ramifications of vigorous barnacle colonization on the puppy and the unexpected increase in parasites that was first thought to be caused only by. It now seemed that the harsh coastal circumstances were an unnatural catalyst for the chemical spill, had contaminated the water with a poisonous mixture that upset the local ecology. This spill had raised the parasite load in the area and permitted barnacles to grow at a startling rate. Recognizing that the puppy's serious injuries were directly caused by the surrounding environment, since the revelation had broad ramifications, Carter called an urgent meeting with her right away. Group comprising local environmental specialist Dr. Mark Thompson, a marine biologist, Ms. Laura Jensen. Dr. Carter, this isn't just nature taking its toll. She said in a shaky voice that it seems like a chemical spill is causing an environmental catastrophe that not only put this puppy in danger, but might also have an impact on all coastal wildlife. According to Dr. Thompson, pollutant levels in the residue were abnormal for the location, indicating intentional pollution. As the word circulated among the rescue unit, stress increased the original presumption that it wasn't a natural phenomena. Evidence of industrial carelessness has now cast doubt on the notion that the puppy's injuries were the result of a terrible natural accident. They came to the realization that the consequences of the spill might be much more extensive than local authorities had initially imagined. News sources that were not aware of any occurrence were suddenly compelled to start a thorough environmental inquiry. And as the cover-up was revealed, community indignation quickly grew. The twist got even deeper when Dr. Jensen disclosed that the particular chemical was known to affect live things in unanticipated ways. Research in labs had revealed that even amounts of the drug may weaken immune systems, increasing an animal's vulnerability to parasite infestations and Opportunistic infections. The puppy's compromised state is probably gave it a prime location for hostile barnacle invasion, and the changed water's chemistry offered an ideal habitat for dangerous parasites amidst the drama that is developing in a local. A former worker of the chemical business came out as a whistleblower and provided devastating testimony in an Olivia Reed, the investigative journalist who covered the story, gave an exclusive interview in which she described how, to safeguard corporate interests, management purposefully downplayed the impact of the spill and covered up its consequences. They were aware that disclosing this information would result in hefty penalties and perhaps the closure of operations. They ignored it in the hopes that nature would take care of it when the whistleblower said it quietly. But this revelation gave the case a crucial new dimension, which only made matters worse. Not only was an industrial mishap had made the puppy's misery worse, but the ensuing cover-up had permitted the environmental damage to go unchecked, leaving the town already in shock at the emotional toll of the rescue. Corporate malfeasance, terrible reality of impacting their local ecosystem. Twist compelled Dr. Carter and her associates to broaden their scope of work beyond treating a abused animal. It turned into a battle for ecological fairness, and they started working with nearby environmental organizations and regulatory bodies, combining their research to call for responsibility. Press conferences were planned, and comprehensive reports were written by the chemical producer to demonstrate how a cascade of ecological catastrophes caused by the leak put not just one puppy, but maybe an entire community of wildlife at that crucial juncture. When the group assembled the sequence of events from the injured puppy's rescue became a symbol of the covert spill and its terrible biological ramifications. The puppy's weak but resilient eyes serve as a quiet testament to the hidden costs of a far bigger war. Dr. Carter is investigating environmental abuse and business negligence. Eyes realize that this case had the potential to drive industries to adopt safer practices by igniting major change, and to shield delicate coastal ecosystems from more damage in light of the now available devastating information. And the episode was the center of public attention and a dramatic confrontation between the chemical producer and environmental advocates. Saw what had begun as a tragic rescue turn into a battle for justice, which held the prospect of altering environmental policy and bringing about much needed. Discusses the disclosure of the chemical accident and how it contributed to the barnacle and parasite infestation's acceleration. On the hurt puppy sent shockwaves through all those involved. Following this shocking turn of events, the rescue crew, local officials and residents had to face the stark truth that the brutality of nature had been exaggerated by human carelessness. Feelings were strong as everyone struggled with the consequences and modified their approach. Dr. Emily Carter was the first to absorb the effects of her first shock gradually gave way to a steely resolve after she reviewed the paperwork and residue samples. She confided in her helper during a quiet moment in her makeshift mobile lab. Not only is this an instance of a puppy caught in the crossfire of nature, but it also serves as a stark reminder that human activity causes this spill, has shifted the tide. We must do more than simply heal these wounds. We must reveal the causes of them. The team's mood, leading to lengthy, heated debates about how to shift their attention from a solitary rescue day. As part of a larger environmental investigation, Dr. Carter started writing thorough reports. In addition to the puppy's health, the odd chemical indicators and their likely source were found to make sure that her efforts will have an impact that goes much beyond saving a single life. While the rescue unit is experiencing pressures were high among the veterinarian team, and several of them were first frustrated by the unexpected turn of events and the increased workload. It turned their ordinary rescue into a possible environmental scandal. But as conversations progressed, many people started to see the circumstance as a chance to promote structural change. One of the senior technicians said in a resolute voice, "We're on the front line, not just for this one puppy. Despite persistent exhaustion, our research may help stop additional animals and even humans from experiencing the same fates over." The team altered treatment regimens and moved resources over multiple late-night strategy discussions to take into consideration the long-term impacts of chemicals. They intend to collaborate with environmental scientists to keep an eye on the region and evaluate continuing risks with the knowledge that their modifications could prevent a future emergency. Local marine biologist Dr. Mark Thompson, whose knowledge had already provided important context for the peculiar barnacle growth, was profoundly impacted by the revelation, and he addressed at a hurriedly scheduled press conference with local environmental organizations. "I've devoted my professional life to comprehending natural ecosystems out of a combination of personal grief and professional concern." He spoke in an emotional tone, and it was shocking to witness such a large-scale industrial disaster. Although it is tragic to upset the delicate equilibrium here, this is also a call to action. If we can demonstrate the relationship, we must hold those accountable. Dr. Thompson started right away, collaborating with local environmental watchdogs and regulatory bodies in order to obtain further testing. Taking sediment and water samples from the impacted region, his proactive approach served to inspire public sentiment and lend. Officer Daniel Rivera is already emotionally invested in giving scientific legitimacy to the mounting calls for accountability. Having been emotionally committed since learning of the puppy's predicament, he now found his duties growing in the co-workers of Precinct Rivera had differing opinions. Some praised his empathy and relentless efforts to justice, but some warned that focusing too much on environmental issues could deplete their resources amid a. Rivera addressed these issues during the late-night debriefing, saying, "I realize this isn't what we anticipated when we began this case, but safeguarding our community involves more than just one occurrence. Implies considering every element that could endanger it, even if it has nothing to do with crime, and his readiness to accept." This wider viewpoint assisted in changing the department's stance as more officers started to recognize the relationship between public safety and environmental health. The local population was also clearly disturbed by the social internet news sites were ablaze with a mixture of indignation and bailimony. Residents described their personal experiences of environmental degradation, particularly those who reside along the rocky coastline, considering its effects on nearby wildlife. A sincere post from a longtime local. "Read this incident is proof that our shores have changed throughout the years, that we are all being harmed by corporate negligence." Community leaders promptly set up town hall meetings and other forums to discuss these matters during a meeting that was convened at the community center. Mrs. Charlotte Green inspired the populace by stating that we must unite and insist that our environment and the lives it protects are safeguarded, and we won't be allowing this puppy's misery to be a sign of a bigger issue. The public's overwhelming support prompted local government representatives to pledge to look into the spill as well as to review the safety guidelines for coastal industry at. Carla Martinez, a volunteer at the animal shelter, battled her own emotional issues. She had always been committed to helping damaged animals, but the matter now affected a personal connection. Carla became personally invested in a group of people after witnessing this young person suffer due to human error. During a late-night discussion, driven by a desire for justice and compassion, volunteers started in. Flyers were distributed as part of the shelter's awareness campaign, explaining not just the pet tale, while also encouraging locals to support stronger regulations and participate in environmental cleanup measures. Industrial Oversight Carla's campaign attracted a lot of people right once since they were motivated by the concrete demand for change. Despite all of these responses, the injured puppy, which the rescue team called Bailey, remained a quiet but powerful emblem of tenacity. And as the therapy went on, minor improvements in its condition turned into a ray of hope. Every little triumph, whether it's a reduction in the parasite load or a particularly obstinate barnacle cluster was successfully removed, confirming the notion that with the correct combination of attention and teamwork, even the most severe wounds could start to mend in. This intricate network of responses and modifications was discovered by the local authorities, the rescue team, and the community, themselves reassessing their positions. The case had gone beyond its original parameters, transforming from a straightforward rescue into a driving force for social and environmental reform in the face of uncertainty and the difficulties. It was evident that this tragedy's ripple consequences were igniting discussions and inspiring initiatives that could ultimately reverse environmental deterioration and corporate negligence. While environmental specialists and the rescue crew attempted to treat the wounded puppy and solve the mystery of the new subplots that emerged after the chemical accident, complicating the situation and expanding its implications. What at first glance appeared to be a simple instance of environmental misfortune soon turned out to be a nexus of interrelated issues that include internal departmental issues, community activism, and corporate cover-ups. Conflicts. The Coastal Environmental Watchdog Group in the area was the source of one of the first surprising developments. Members of the Integrity Coalition (CIC) are already incensed over the possible cover-up of the chemical leak. They started testing water and sediment samples collected from the coastline. Their initial results indicated that not only had the chemical spill sped up the growth of parasites and barnacles, but it may have also set off a chain reaction of ecological disruptions. This revelation rocked the community and heightened demands throughout the entire coastal region. A news conference was arranged by CIC leaders to discuss corporate accountability. Their information, calling on local government representatives to begin a thorough inquiry into industrial operations along the. And at the same time, rumors of a planned cover-up started to spread. Several local fishermen reported observing odd patterns along the shoreline in the community. Places where a startling amount of dead marine life had washed up on the coast, and the water looked brownish. Once disregarded, these data were now being reinterpreted in light of the chemical. Proof that an esteemed veteran fisherman even asserted that a retired employee of the marine chemical producer over covert spills that were frequently ignored. His story fueled the fire, indicating that the current occurrence could be a single part of a much bigger internal pressures, and a pattern of environmental carelessness in the hospital further increased. Dr. Emily Carter's fervent support for the puppies' cause was beginning to conflict with financial limitations and administrative priorities. Hospital managers are being questioned on how they are allocating resources, claimed that the resources and focus allocated to this well-known rescue could take away from other important regions of patient care. Dr. Carter and the hospital had a heated meeting. Management, in which she argued that the case's larger relevance goes beyond simply rescuing a single animal, maintained that the goal is to reveal a risky trend that could have a profound impact on countless lives. Ignoring this could be interpreted as our complicity in allowing corporate malin to go unchecked, both humanly and animally. Despite the skepticism of certain administrators, her passionate appeal compelled them to take the long view into account. An additional degree of intricacy is added by the consequences of delay, according to local investigative journalist Olivia Reed. Olivia stepped up her reporting on the story and started getting anonymous tips concerning the chemical spill, as well as possible conflicts of interest between local authorities. And one piece of advice specifically for the chemical maker was a string of emails that suggested high-ranking government officials and industrial executives had covert meetings. According to the company's stolen communications, financial incentives may have been utilized to suppress. Olivia's reporting on environmental problems served as a focal point for community organizers, and she also divided the public, with some calling for quick regulatory action and others warning against rushing to judgment without unquestionable evidence in the face of these extrinsic forces. Officer Daniel Rivera, who had previously been actively involved in departmental disagreements within the local police, also. Now, his team was split regarding the extent of the puppy's suffering. According to the inquiry, several top officers are uncomfortable with the growing emphasis on business and environmental issues. Rivera should adhere closely to the conventional tasks of law enforcement. Our purpose is to enforce the law, not to become involved in. During a heated briefing on labor conflicts, one officer objected. While inspired by Rivera's sincere dedication, the department's younger contingent started pushing for a comprehensive strategy for public safety that acknowledged the interconnectedness. This intrinsic conflict between community well-being and environmental health threatens to interfere with operations cohesiveness, requiring Rivera to strike a careful balance between departmental allegiance and personal conviction. Carla Martinez, a more intimate volunteer at the neighborhood animal rescue who had grown more concerned for the puppy's recuperation and encountered her own difficulties. Carla had always been the compassionate voice of the shelter, But she was now also facing the harsh truth that the environmental, all stray animals along the coast who were determined to make a difference could suffer long-term effects from this catastrophe. Carla planned educational workshops for locals and started an awareness campaign at the shelter. Residents handed out flyers outlining the link between animal health and industrial pollution, and even organized a fundraiser to help fund additional environmental testing and medical care for her grassroots. Efforts to rally community support started, but some people who felt the shelter was inadequate also criticized them. Should only concentrate on saving animals, not environmental activism, or any of these new subplots. Internal police, corporate cover-ups, environmental activism, discord, and grassroots community initiatives I've started to come together to form a complex network of difficulties that highlighted the puppy ordeal's wide-ranging effects. The wounded animal had turned into an improbable representation of both individual tenacity and a larger fight for environmental justice and openness as the sun set over the rocky coastline, regardless of whether they were local people, hospital employees, or regulators aware that the collaborative efforts to find the truth and hold the guilty persons accountable were far more important than saving a single life. Accountable had now evolved into a pivotal conflict for the region's destiny in this whirling vortex of the puppy's difficulties and revelations have led to its gradual recovery and quiet resilience remains central to the narrative, and its fight against parasites and barnacles was now inextricably linked to a bigger combat corporate disregard and environmental damage with every new piece. As more information became available and all opposing viewpoints were heard, the community prepared for what was about to happen. A storm that had the potential to topple established hierarchies of power and reinterpret what it meant to safeguard both nature and the endangered lives it supported as the inquiry progressed. And the chemical spill's ripple effects extended well beyond the injured puppy's immediate care, resulting in a number of everyone concerned started to experience complicated interactions and emotional quandaries. These weren't just technical issues, difficulties to overcome. They were individual crises that compelled each character to reconsider their principles and obligations in the face of severe institutional and environmental neglect. Dr. Emily Carter, who continued to lead the rescue effort, was more and more divided between her clinical duty and her developing role as an environmental advocate. Late one night, following an especially taxing course of therapy, she sat by herself in the mobile lab silence, staring at the sensitive monitoring screen that showed the puppy's pulse beat gradually calming. During that introspective period, she revealed in her blog, "I started working in this field to save lives, but now I had to face the truth that, if left unchecked, the environment in which we live has the potential to kill life." She mirrored the internal conflict by asking, "How can I continue to heal when our system is rigged to harm?" At the same time as emotions were simmering within the local animal shelter, several of her co-workers started to express themselves as well. Carla Martinez, a volunteer, was well known for her leadership in the grassroots awareness campaign. On the one hand, unshakable compassion now battled the burden of obligation. She was deeply obligated to tend to all injured animals, but she also painfully understood that during a late-night discussion, the shelter's meager resources were challenged by an environmental crisis. Carla said, "I feel Bailey every time I watch his condition improve with other shelter workers. But when I wonder whether we are fighting a battle for the hundreds of strays that may be suffering in silence as a result of this pollution." Her admittance that she was losing the battle sparked a round of sympathetic glances and anecdotes of previous rescues that had not been sufficient to stop the increasing environmental harm that the volunteers, despite being united in their objective, they struggled with emotions of inadequacy and profound sadness over Officer Daniel Rivera struggled with his own apparently overwhelming precinct dilemma. Rivera, who was known for his rugged appearance, had been visibly disturbed by internal struggle, by what had transpired since he had initially found the injured puppy during a private discussion. "I never imagined a case like this would hit me so hard every night when I pass by," he acknowledged with a close buddy. "I can't help but feel like we're all missing something bigger when I watch Bailey sleeping there beneath that oak tree." Truth about the environment and our responsibility to preserve it his younger partner. A sensitive officer's quiet response suggested that the issue may be more than simply upholding the law, defending the voiceless regardless of their skin or fur. This debate brought attention to the emotional contradiction within the department between a more comprehensive, sympathetic understanding and the conventional duty-bound approach of public service elsewhere. Local residents are already agitated by the new. At a community forum, those involved in environmental controversies also became embroiled in personal issues. Arranged by activist Ms. Citizens of Charlotte Green told tales of environmental deterioration and personal loss. One middle-aged man's voice was shaking with pain brought up memories of my father's fishing career, and I observed when I saw what had happened, I couldn't understand why the sea-changing fish disappeared and the shores were desolate. I learned from this dog that our surroundings are an integral part of who we are, and not merely a setting. Though not everyone experienced this, introspection encouraged others to share similar experiences, resulting in a collective catharsis. A tiny group of skeptics claimed that concentrating on environmental issues would simply serve to distract from the revived sense of solidarity. Focus away from more pressing issues like public safety and economic stability. Despite being softer, their voices created a tension that threatened to shatter the developing. The emotional terrain was further muddied by solidarity media coverage, as evidenced by Olivia Reed's investigative stories, which had gradually revealed links between business carelessness and the chemical leak, which sparked public discussion. During her interviews, a number of local residents voiced mixed feelings, including indignation over industrial misconduct, grief for the impacted animals, and a wary Bailey that justice might at last be. During a heartfelt conversation, an elderly inhabitant shared her personal convictions regarding the harshness of nature. We're being changed by the potential for human involvement and responsibility. I once thought that. She responded in a hesitant voice that nature was just harsh, but now I realize that it's frequently. Her remarks emphasized a more comprehensive understanding of the ways in which our actions make it so. Dylan has struck a profound chord with the community at large, and we're not limited to the rescue team or the police. In the midst of these complex connections, each network member, including Dr. Carter, Carla, a volunteer at the Rivera Shelter, or Maisie Green, a community activist, started to realize that there were multiple damaged puppies in this situation. Addressing the agonizing relationship between environmental degradation and human indifference in every emotional quandary. All of the individual tales told during community gatherings combined with internal conflict created a complicated mosaic of Bailey's despair and his unwavering will for change. As the inquiry persisted, and the wounded puppy gradually began to show indications of healing, it became clear that the fight for environmental justice was just as much a struggle for the community's soul as it concerned animal rescue, and the issues they all encountered on accountability, empathy, and the real. The next stage of their search for the truth would soon be driven by the cost of development as a tangible air of foreboding started to permeate the rescue location as dusk descended over the rocky coastline once more. Early disclosures of the chemical spill, the accelerated barnacle growth, and the parasite surge had prepared the ground for a much more significant mystery in the days. After the first treatments, a number of odd, unexplained incidents and anonymous warnings started to appear, escalating the suspense and suggesting a darker, more sinister link behind the environmental catastrophe. Disaster 1. An urgent call arrived in the evening when Dr. Emily Carter and her staff were going over the most recent lab findings. From Mr. Roberto Silva, a local fisherman who is well known for having a thorough understanding of the coastline, stated that he had seen an unmarked truck while out on his boat, parked close to a restricted industrial area and a location where chemical spills are said to have occurred in the past. I observed He recalled in a tremulous voice that the truck's idle lights went off, and it sped off, just as fast as it had appeared. Despite being brief, this eyewitness report prompted questions about whether this truck was connected to or implicated in the present incident, to a trend of clandestine operations along the coast, while Officer Daniel Rivera, who had already sparked a wave of community concern with his original discovery of the injured puppy, received a mysterious, late one evening, Chan sent a text message from an unidentified number that was just. Rivera's brow furrowed as he thought about the fact that there is more to this than meets the eye. Implications. The statement appeared to imply that the chemical spill was a part of a larger incident rather than a single incident. This anonymous tip was part of a purposeful, continuous cover-up that was planned by significant interests. Gave his investigation a new lease on life, leading him to extend his patrol routes to include Carla, a volunteer at the local animal shelter, pointed him spots he had previously missed. Along with the growing number of strays displaying symptoms, Martinez started to observe a troubling trend. Like Bailey's, there have been cases of animals with strange growths and unexplained skin lesions. Even among. Carla received an email from a shelter employee in a nearby town alerting individuals who had been rescued from inland areas that they had seen other animals with unusual parasite illnesses and indications of chemical burns. The email said, with the urgent conclusion of the Stark message, "We may be spreading the spill. Require answers before it's too late." These reports, along with the previous lab results, suggested a more extensive ecological disaster that may impact household animals, people, and coastal wildlife also. As tensions increased, Olivia Reed, a relentless investigative journalist, broke another important lead in a series of interviews with a former worker of the spill-causing chemical manufacturer. According to shocking claims Olivia discovered, the whistleblower speaking under the stated that the business intentionally released chemicals that would disturb regional ecosystems under a condition of anonymity. Strategy intended to minimize the dangers by placing the responsibility on natural events, which they estimated the. According to the source, a rise in barnacles and parasites would appear to be an environmental abnormality, but in fact it was a controlled discharge used to cover up more serious environmental laws. This shocking discovery not only gave the suspicions that were already there more weight, but it also increased the stakes considerably since it linked a large corporation to intentional environmental damage in the local community leaders called an emergency meeting at the town hall in the middle of these revelations. The gathering was crowded with environmental watchdog organization members, activists, and worried locals. The possible long-term effects of the leak were the subject of intense discussions. This goes beyond a single damaged puppy, argued as an ardent environmentalist, that if we disregard it, it will affect the health of our entire coastal community. Who knows how many human and animal lives will be impacted by these warning signs, and the heated debate highlighted the growing agreement that the chemical spill may be just the beginning and that further research is necessary before we're launched. The entire extent of the devastation would not be seen back on the coast until nightfall, according to Officer Rivera. When he returned to Maplewood Dog Park, he saw an unsettling stillness in the dark light of a flickering street lamp. Bailey the puppy appeared to be unaware of the mayhem going on around him as he slept peacefully beneath the old oak tree. But there were a lot of unanswered questions and an air of. Rivera's eyes searched the shadows, half expecting to see a shadowy creature lurking there. The tension near the water's edge was almost palpable, a silent assurance that the truth was within reach, even if it meant removing the many layers of deceit that had long shielded a company secret. Too long, every new bit of information, every rumor that is uttered, and an anonymous tip increased the situation's complexity for the community, the rescue crew, and local law enforcement and environmental scientific corporations were now intertwined in a web of intrigue. The stakes were higher than ever because of misconduct and the bare vulnerability of a wounded animal battling for its life. The urgency of the questions increased. Who was responsible for the cover-up? How far would they go to conceal the truth? And most crucially, what steps would be necessary to repair a damaged ecosystem and preserve the life it supported with the waves crashing relentlessly against the rocks and the coastal wind picking up, the scene was set for a dramatic conflict, the indications of intentional environmental destruction, and the growing wave of social unrest assured. The investigation's next stage would need all parties to confront harsh realities. The enigmatic phrase, the whistleblower's terrifying statement, and the unmarked truck were all signs of the impending storm. On the verge of breaking one that would demonstrate if accountability and justice could triumph over corporate greed and disregard for the environment, as the inquiry into the chemical leak and its catastrophic consequences on the. As the coastal environment grew stronger, new subplots started to blend in with the primary story, attracting a varied group of characters whose lives were now irrevocably intertwined. Dr. Emily Carter was at the center of these changes due to the environmental disaster that was developing, and her resolve to. The mission to save the injured dog, now known as Bailey, had grown, and she and her veterinary team, Dr. Carter, began collaborating with Dr. Mark Thompson and other environmental specialists to monitor the spill's long-term impacts on the local marine life. As a result of their cooperation, a collaborative research project was established that sought to track pollution levels and investigate the potential effects of such harmful exposures on the surrounding. Despite being a necessity, this relationship created an unanticipated bond between communities in the fields of environmental science and veterinary medicine, which had not previously frequently crossed paths. In one late, Dr. Thompson confided in Dr. Carter during an afternoon visit at a nearby university lab. Your efforts with Bailey go beyond simply curing a single animal. They also open our eyes to a systemic flaw that might have consequences for all living things in this area. And their discussion paved the way for a number of cooperative initiatives that would eventually have an impact on local policy debates while local animals. Carla Martinez, a volunteer at the shelter where she had grown more committed. Carla's grassroots awareness campaign had started, and she was now seeing the ripple effects to alert nearby towns about reports of comparable incidents occurring. Animals with odd skin conditions and parasite infestations began arriving from a number of neighboring settlements, motivated by, with the support of the shelter's expanding network, and inspired by Bailey's tale, a regional workshop on environmental risks and rescue. During a single impassioned session, a volunteer from a nearby town disclosed that it's not a coincidence that we've been witnessing an increasing number of animals impacted by this. This workshop raised public awareness that there is a serious problem with our environment, but also helped create a network of environmental activists and rescue organizations, strengthening and connecting. Daniel Rivera, the precinct officer for the coalition dedicated to holding industrial pollutants accountable, was, in addition to managing his own internal and external obstacles, he worked tirelessly to record every hint from the mysterious. Not only had he gained respect from some of his peers for sending text messages to the unmarked truck sightings, co-workers, but had also caught the interest of some younger officers who were motivated by Rivera's academic empathy, started to view environmental studies as a component of their obligation to. Rivera found himself guiding these offices in informal late-night briefings to safeguard the community, stressing that true public safety now includes environmental stewardship as well as crime prevention. Our role is changing, he said. When the safety of our community is jeopardized, so is our ecosystem. Therefore, this change in viewpoint gradually assisted in bridging the gap between the new environmental justice movement and traditional law enforcement. Community-level activism. Local activist Miss Charlotte Green and Olivia Reed, an investigative journalist, kept up the momentum at a number of town hall meetings. Locals recounted first-hand accounts of the impacts of the declining coastline. Their life, from local fishermen losing their livelihoods to coastal families experiencing health issues to an elderly fisherman. With remorse in his eyes, he recalled, "I've watched the ocean change and creatures go extinct, and now with this poor." His testimony, among others, raised my concern that it's too late for our way of life. Strong arguments in public places, but a feeling of unity emerges from them, started to appear as more local residents realized how intertwined environmental health and their personal welfare. Olivia Reed's blog has evolved into a community center. These disparate stories were linked by updates and incisive investigations in a number of. Reed created a multimedia piece that integrated insider interviews, personal testimonies, and scientific data. Captivating story that emphasized the human tales behind the corporate malfeasance while also exposing the. Her work garnered regional media attention, which increased the pressure on local authorities to take decisive action. As the investigation progressed, a particularly interesting subplot emerged. when a professor at a community college charms Dr. Linda Morales, a specialist in. Dr. Carter was contacted by environmental toxicology. Dr. Morales had been investigating how industrial accidents affect coastal ecosystems over the long run and discovered a clear connection between recent incidents and comparable trends seen in other areas. She suggested conducting a collaborative investigation that would measure more extensive environmental harm using Bailey's scenario as a starting point. Cooperation strengthened the case for more funding by adding a rigorous scientific dimension. Environmental changes and regulatory supervision as these subplots came together. Bailey, the injured puppy, continued to be a silent yet powerful representation of tenacity. Every link between regional animal rescue networks and cooperative research initiatives and the changing law enforcement viewpoints and the passionate community testimonials supported an increasing agreement that the combined efforts of the rescue team revealed that the catastrophe that affected Bailey was a sign of far deeper systemic problems. Law enforcement, community activists, and environmental scientists were starting to put up a strong fight against. By the time dusk returned to the rocky coastline, environmental damage and corporate negligence had occurred. All of the groups, whether driven by community action, scientific research, or humanitarian rescue, had started to realize that each of their own efforts was a piece of a bigger picture. The relationships formed during this phase not only strengthened the inquiry, but also gave Bailey hope that they might work together to significant shift in the way local ecosystems were preserved and industries were held responsible. As the investigation went on, the different subplots started to entwine the circumstances around the injured dog, and tensions between environmental organizations increased when the chemical spill reached a critical point. Local law police, community activists, and hospital management all the gathered facts and impassioned testimony now came together due to competing priorities and growing demand to act into a dramatic stalemate in which the local ecosystem's future health was at stake. And community well-being, a high-stakes meeting was held late one cloudy evening. Met at the town hall with local leaders of the Coastal Integrity Coalition, environmental scientists headed by Dr. Mark Thompson, and government representatives. Ms. Charlotte Green, a community activist, participated in contentious discussions in a crowded room. Occurred as each side fought for control of the story, demonstrating that this chemical spill isn't a unique occurrence that was deemed a CIC because it is a sign of systemic corporate negligence. In answer, the spokesperson's voice echoed with both rage and resolve. We must make sure that any inquiry doesn't needlessly harm local industry, the city council member warned. Endanger our financial security. The conflict of interest was evident with. Internally, each side accuses the other of either downplaying or exaggerating the crisis's severity. When disputes at Riverdale General Hospital became intense, Dr. Emily Carter, who had fervently defended the distribution of funds for Bailey's care and now found herself in a heated dispute with hospital management. CFO Mark Reynolds contended at a meeting in a small administrative office that we cannot afford to devote all of our resources to this one well-known case at the expense of other important. Carter, the patient care services doctor, but it's not simply about. The purpose of one dog is to draw attention to a hazardous environmental risk that could affect hundreds or even thousands of people, of lives in our society, and neglecting it would be equivalent to participating in a cover-up. The board was split after the debate, with some members growing more understanding of the need for environmental protection and openness. Daniel Rivera, a judicial officer, is already emotionally immersed in the issue at hand, increasing strain in his department as well. During a standard briefing, a veteran officer renowned for his using a traditional approach, you said unequivocally that we are here to uphold the law, not to act as environmental watchdogs. Public safety now entails tackling environmental threats as well as criminal activity, which has only intensified the internal conflict that was threatening to undermine the department's unity. While older cops are more conservative, younger officers are supporting Rivera's more expansive concept of public service. Members advise members to be cautious, but things drastically changed when Olivia Reed, an investigative journalist, revealed new papers in a breaking news story that implicated a significant Internal memoranda from the chemical producer involved in the cover-up of the spill were included in the release documents, and they not only verified the spill was accidental, but it also suggested intentional deception to evade regulations. The shocking discovery sparked a flurry of public indignation, and local media outlets started to hold local governments and corporations accountable on social media. Exploded with hashtags like Justice for Bailey and Coastal Crisis, dividing views and igniting demonstrations around the coast in the midst of this commotion. Officer Rivera's patrol revealed a crucial eyewitness report. Met a terrified local who claimed to have seen an unmarked truck idling close to the tidal pool's industrial facility on multiple occasions, and each time I saw it, the resident's voice trembled in terror as the water gazed off. Testimony not only supported previous indications of covert industrial activities, but it also gave the increasing skepticism that the leak could be a part of a systematic, ongoing effort to conceal environmental violations concurrently with these developing crises. The animal volunteer Carla Martinez, who had led the regional awareness campaign, had to deal with internal conflict at the shelter. Campaign was met with a group of volunteers who were starting to express concern about the increased emphasis on corporate malfeasance could draw attention away from the urgent needs of animals who are hurt. One volunteer stated that we must not lose sight of our core goal to care for these fragile individuals, which sparked a intense discussion that endangered the shelter's cohesion due to the growing disputes and corporate cover-ups. Internal conflict inside the police force, conflict among hospital managers, and even dissent produced a sense of uncertainty and urgency within the animal shelter using. With each fresh piece of information and impassioned appeal heard in public settings, it became evident that the situation had expanded well beyond a single incident. The chemical spill was once believed to be the terrible incident now seemed to be the beginning of a huge iceberg of regulatory failure and industrial carelessness as divergent forces came together in the neighborhood as dark transitioned to night and a chilly breeze blew across the beach. Already split but profoundly impacted by what was happening, the town hall prepared for the impending confrontation. As community members, we heard voices rise and fall in a clamor of rage, despair, and resolve. Call for prompt and unyielding action from local authorities, setting the stage for a dramatic conflict that would compel all parties involved, including hospital managers and chemical manufacturers, to urging local activists and law police to accept the repercussions of their deeds and inactions during this period of increased tension. Rivera, Dr. Carter, and Mrs. Green were aware that the following actions could impact the health and future of the entire population in addition to Bailey's and the injured animals' fates. It was now time for the coastal community to move past contentious discussions and internal strife to take decisive action, a move that pledged to uncover pervasive wrongdoing, restore damaged confidence, and eventually open the door for long-lasting shift. As the growing body of information and brewing disputes intensified, the several stakeholders convened for a crucial meeting at the town hall, where fervent opinions and harsh realities were compelled to conflict among local activists, environmental specialists, and community leaders in a crowded auditorium. The atmosphere was charged with anxiety and anticipation between law enforcement officials and worried citizens. Ms. Charlotte Green emerged from the front of the room with a determined urgency that we have discovered proof beyond dispute that a significant chemical leak that has fundamentally changed our coastal ecology is not an isolated. She said, "This spill has triggered an environmental emergency," her voice echoing throughout the crowded hall. Problem that is putting wildlife in jeopardy, as evidenced by the situation of our injured puppy Bailey, but is also impacting people's lives and our community's economy. Drew mutters in agreement. From an audience who had endured years of suffering due to workplace carelessness. At the same time, Dr. Emily Carter, who had spearheaded Bailey's rescue, was asked to present her results to a group of scientists. She displayed a number of slides describing the chemical analysis of water samples with accuracy and genuine emotion. Pictures of the parasites that had afflicted Bailey, as well as close-up shots of barnacle growth, show what we are. She clarified that what she was seeing was an abnormal growth of these organisms that were connected to the chemical residue from a well-known manufacturer's undetected leak, her statements backed by the idea that nature's fury was the only cause was refuted by stark pictures and facts, which instead pointed to intentional business practices that had caused a chain reaction of environmental damage. As Dr. Carter finished, Department Officer Daniel Rivera, a representative of the local police department, came forward with a steely resolve, having been profoundly committed since his emotional discovery of Bailey Rivera's voice. He claimed that I stood before him today because I have been patrolling these shores night after night, and I have witnessed things that defy understanding as a law enforcement official and someone who feels that defending our community entails facing both human, addressing environmental dangers head-on. His appeal was greeted with hesitant nods and applause, particularly from the. Not all the voices in the room were heard by the younger officers there, who recognized in his words a call to redefine public service. United, but a senior chemical manufacturing company official who had been abruptly called showed up. He tried to minimize the evidence through a measured video chat, adding that we have consistently insisted that any leaks were under allowable limits, and that any impacts that were noticed were a result of. Despite his corporate poise, his explanation about natural oscillations was received with. A local environmental watchdog spokesman immediately refuted the data, which unmistakably demonstrates a correlation between the activities of your business and the sharp increase in environmental pollutants. The watchdog shot back. The heated discussion highlighted the enormous risks involved and drastically raised our demands for complete openness and accountability. Lay the foundation for a more thorough probe. As hostilities increased, the room turned into a battlefield of rival. Some community members, enraged by injustices in the past, asked. Others are nonetheless concerned about possible economic fallout despite the company's harsh penalties and prompt regulatory action. Called for prudence and a well-rounded strategy to preserve local jobs in the face of these divisive opinions. Mr. Green suggested assembling a separate oversight body with representatives from the community, legal professionals, and environmental scientists to carry out a thorough examination into the spill and its wide-ranging effects. We must be open and honest, she vehemently stated, because by shining we can restore trust and make sure that our community and environment are safe by shedding light on every dark corner. Shielded from potential danger, a very tense moment occurred when Officer Rivera shared a crucial. According to a local resident's eyewitness report, they frequently saw an unmarked truck near. His testimony supported the mounting evidence in the vicinity of the industrial location in question on multiple occasions. Rivera contended that we cannot disregard these testimonials because they implicate the company in a willful cover-up, imply a pattern of conduct that goes much beyond a simple coincidence. His remarks inspired the group, garnering backing from. After hours of heated discussion and the presentation of strong arguments, many people were keen to see justice done. Evidence. The group decided that an impartial oversight committee should be established right away with a mandate to look into all facets of the spill, including internal business communications and chemical data. Regulatory compliance. The task team also decided to work with environmental organizations and local media, making certain that the final vote represented the communal desire and that the investigation would be as transparent as possible. The proposal received universal approval from the community and the meeting. Mr. Green's closing remarks demonstrated the room's resolute atmosphere. Comments struck a profound chord today, and we've stood up not just for Bailey but for all living things and community members impacted by this tragedy. We will not permit corporations to allowing carelessness to continue unchallenged. We will hold those accountable and safeguard our environment and home. Prevent additional damage outside the town hall as the guests scattered into the shade. Rivera, the night air officer, hovered for a while with Bailey nestled under his arm. He looked up at the starry sky and solemnly vowed to keep fighting for justice until when a secret was exposed, the choices made that evening prepared the ground for a dramatic showdown with those who had long defended themselves against a struggle that was characterized by corporate dominance and bureaucratic indifference. Pledged to reshape the coastal community's future as twilight descended on the Rocky. The entire community prepared for the constant collision of the tide and the coastline against weathered rocks. When all of the hidden truths would eventually be revealed, the sequence of the chemical spills revelations, the accelerated growth of parasites and barnacles, and the growing evidence of corporate cover-ups had driven all parties to the verge of collapse in Maplewood and along its. A dramatic finale at the town hall meeting was set in motion by the electric tension that pervaded the damaged shores. Held in a crowded auditorium with candlelight, as community emotions reached a fever pitch, members, local government representatives, and environmental activists from law enforcement all assembled in the room to await the report of the Independent Oversight Committee, buzzed with worrisome whispers as everyone recounted recollections of previous losses and troubled looks. The chamber reflects the underlying fear of what the truth could reveal, and Ed the Bailey's hope that justice might finally be served. Disclosed that Charlotte Green, a devoted community leader, is missed on stage. Tonight, we stand here at the podium on the brink of a turning point, she said, her voice shaking. Nevertheless, corporate dishonesty and industrial carelessness have caused our coast to suffer for far too long. The chemical accident that put this unfortunate puppy in danger is not a singular incident. Rather, it is a sign of a system that has long put profit before a people and the environment. And now we demand that every responsible person be held accountable. Her passionate remarks caused a rumble of whispers to spread around the. Officer Daniel Rivera was still clearly visible to the audience during the gathering. Impacted by what had happened, came forward to give an important piece of evidence that I had personally seen. He spoke resolutely in spite of the tremor of the unexplained action near the industrial plant. His eyes were filled with emotion as he saw an unmarked truck and saw shadowy men repeatedly. Numerous anonymous remarks in the area around the spill site suggest intentional efforts to conceal this. His testimony supported the idea that we cannot allow these behaviors to continue unchecked, increased the level of tension in the room as confirmed by eyewitness reports and photographic evidence, strengthened the community's call for complete openness as the Independent Oversight Committee started to provide its preliminary results. The anticipation in the air became almost tangible. Charts depicting the rapid, aberrant growth of barnacles on CH revealed concerning increases in pollution levels. The stark contrast between the water quality before and after the spill were demonstrated via coastal pebbles and comparison photos. The marine biologist working on the investigation, Dr. Mark Thompson, speaking quickly, these findings eliminate any possibility that the spill has caused an ecological imbalance that impacts our local communities as well as marine life, the chemical. His remarks reverberated across the hall. The residue we found is far beyond natural variation. It is a human-made crisis. Highlighting the seriousness of the situation in light of these scientific findings, Olivia. An additional layer of stress was introduced by Reed's live broadcast on a local news channel. As she summarized what was happening, her calm yet passionate voice dominated the screen. Narrative that we are seeing this evening, she said, is the coming together of the evidence of corporate misconduct and the uproar of the environmental science community. People in our neighborhood are demanding action against the chemical company, and this is not merely. The broadcast reached homes all throughout the country and was about one injured puppy, but it was also about the future of our entire shoreline. The area, generating intense debate and mounting pressure on local leaders to take quick action. Residents of the shoreline organized vigils and protests outside the town hall as the conference came to a head, gathered close to the shore with signs calling for justice and clean water. The sounds of fervent chants and the steady drumming emphasized the group's determination to hold the. During these brief period, the previously peaceful Maplewood community was united and polluters were held accountable. Front committed to taking back its surroundings and making sure that no animal or human life would suffer in silence. Once more, inside the town hall, the tension reached a height when Miss Green's voice delivered a final, impactful declaration. Tonight, Rose, let's put aside our disagreements and stand together. For the sake of truth, we will not let corporate greed dictate our environment or allow this tragedy to define who we are. The crowd exploded with applause as we declared our readiness to fight for all living things that cause this coast home in the future, and celebrates a therapeutic release of years' worth of repressed anger and grief as the conference came to an end and the first signs of dawn started to illuminate the sky. Each participant departed with a heavy yet. With everything of Bailey's heart, the stage was prepared for a pivotal encounter when the combined weight of public demand and community scientific data would deal the ultimate blow to Bailey. The injured puppy remains among those accountable for the environmental catastrophe. At Maplewood Dog Park, sleeping soundly under the old oak tree had come to represent their battle, a silent observer of a fight for justice that held the potential to change their beloved coastline's destiny as the first. As morning rose over the turbulent coastline, the protracted, agonizing conflict came to a head in one last thrilling. Law police, environmental activists, and the community's rescue squad are all motivated by months of gathering heartbreaking testimonies and mounting evidence for a final public confrontation at Maplewood. At this point, hidden truths would no longer be permitted to fester in secrecy in a big, crowded dog park. A news conference was held inside a tent set up close to the old oak tree where the hurt puppy Bailey had spent so many nights. The air was charged with excitement and unfiltered passion as it was about to start. Media cameras panned as environmental specialists, community leaders, and independent. As the oversight committee took their seats on stage, whispers filled the air. The steady hum of resolute voices. All eyes were riveted to the platform where an unwavering community activist named Miss Charlotte Green came forth with her. With a mix of determination and grief today, she started off by speaking in a solid tone that reverberated around the audience. Confront a reality that has long been concealed by official indifference and corporate greed. The chemical, the leak that damaged our coastline and hurt our priceless Bailey wasn't an accident. Rather, it was the outcome of a willful cover-up by those who prioritize profit over the environment and people. We are here to demand responsibility and to guarantee the survival of our community, marine life, and our shielded Dr. Emily. As Mrs. Green's remarks resonated throughout the tent, she was joined on stage by Carter, the veterinarian who had spearheaded the rescue, who gave a series of. Behind her, in a series of captivating slides, Dr. Carter described the remarkable therapeutic efforts that had saved Bailey's life, displaying detailed pictures of the barnacle clusters that were extracted from its fur and microscopic slides of the peculiar parasites and the chemical analysis that connected the injuries to a large industrial facility's toxic spill. There is no question about the photographs and data, and Dr. Carter stated in an emotionally charged voice that the material we found is far. This leak and the cover-up that followed have not only exceeded any natural occurrence, threatened not only this small life, but also our entire coastal ecology. The tension peaked when Daniel Rivera, an officer renowned for his passionate devotion since his first emotional. Rivera now described his personal experiences as a relentless patrol RS along the shoreline after the finding of Bailey. An unmarked truck was seen by witnesses idling suspiciously close to the spill location, and the mysterious text messages alerting me to potential threats. I've witnessed things that are inexplicable, he claimed. Despite my voice breaking, I stand before you as more than just a law enforcement official, but as a part of this community. I refuse to let our future and environment be sacrificed for business earnings. At that precise time, a dramatic twist appeared on the large screen behind Olivia Reed's speakers. The investigative reporter who had inspired public opinion with his relentless reportage presented a number of internal notes from the chemical manufacturer that caused the spill were released, and the documents are shown in stark detail. Showed that executives had purposefully falsified data to regulatory bodies and downplayed the incident. As a particularly damaging member was read out, agencies commanded the audience to remain silent at all costs. There will be irreversible financial harm from public disclosure. The revelation caused a chorus of gasps and cries of indignation from both sides of the tent as the emotive testimony and the exposed facts reverberated in the. We had reached a crossroads, and Mrs. Green urged for urgent action, declared. Will we stand together to demand justice for our community, or will we permit this cover-up to continue? The room erupted in cheers for the wildlife and all living things impacted by this industrial irresponsibility, and resolute scream signs that proclaim, "Clean coast now," and justice for Bailey, waved high in the assembled audience, signifying a united demand for accountability at a pivotal point. That made everything clear. The Independent Oversight Committee declared its findings after conducting a thorough. The chemical leak and its long-term effects would be the subject of an urgent, comprehensive public investigation, collaboration between local authorities, and strict monitoring of those involved. Corporation, we pledge to you that we will not leave any stone unturned. The committee chair said this in a steady but firm voice. Kept going until all the information about this environmental catastrophe is revealed and those in charge are held accountable. The day's emotional impact was evident as the gathering reached its crescendo. Officer Rivera looked out over the sea of determined faces while still holding this small dog, Bailey, in his arms. "Has come to represent our battle," he added quietly, his eyes watering. "Let it serve as a reminder that each act of we can overcome cruelty, whether it comes from nature or is made worse by human avarice. Resolved to defend the sacred today, we battle not only for one life, but for the future of our whole coastline." The conclusive remarks, the incriminating proof, and the community's outpouring. Resolutions served as the culmination of a protracted conflict, and in that pivotal moment, Maplewood's collective voice. Together, they made a forceful statement that the era of silent suffering and unbridled corporate malfeasance was ended. The settlement and its guardians are bathed in a beautiful glow as the first rays of a new morning illuminate the tide-washed shoreline. Stood united, prepared to recover and make sure that the catastrophe that had threatened to destroy their coastal community would not happen again. The future of home would be characterized by justice, openness, and steadfast Bailey as the rocky coastline was illuminated by the first rays of a Bailey-full dawn. The turbulent happenings that had shook Maplewood gradually gave way to a cautious feeling of rejuvenation. What began as a frantic attempt to save a beaten puppy named Bailey had turned into a turning point that revealed environmental advocacy and community togetherness were ignited by corporate malfeasance. Split by silence and disregard in the weeks after the spectacular public confrontation at Maplewood Dog Park sweeping. Every aspect of the local environment was affected, and the Independent Oversight Committee is currently totally backed by environmental scientists, law enforcement, and community leaders. Initiated a thorough investigation of the chemical leak. Their findings not only demonstrated the grave ecological repercussions such as an increase in parasite illnesses and an extraordinary barnacle overgrowth, but also a history of corrupt, the implicated chemicals' internal communications and attempts at concealment. Strong scientific data and growing public indignation put pressure on manufacturer local government authorities. Decided to take firm action to hold the company responsible, and regulatory bodies were called upon to enforce new oversight procedures and stronger environmental regulations along the shore were implemented to stop future occurrences. The community started to sigh a collective breath as word of these measures circulated. Residents who had previously felt helpless are relieved to see tangible, provide evidence that even the most difficult times could lead to a cleaner, brighter future at the core of. This change was brought about by people like Doctor's unwavering resolve. Officer Daniel Rivera, Dr. Carter, and Emily Carter, whose unwavering efforts have prevented Bailey from meeting a terrible end and kept up projects that connect environmental protection with animal care. Conservation started outreach initiatives in collaboration with nearby institutions and marine biologists with the goal of keeping an eye on coastal health and informing the public about the link between industrial operations and her efforts to promote the welfare of wildlife not only contributed to increased money for environmental research, but also served as an inspiration. A fresh wave of caring experts committed to safeguarding delicate environments. Officer Rivera, who started his emotional journey by crying when he saw a puppy in pain, became a symbol of tenacity and change inside the police force. His public statements and his support for a more comprehensive understanding of public safety, which included environmental stewardship, assisted in changing Rivera's departmental priorities. Co-workers who had before doubted his emotional investment eventually came to accept the notion that community protection meant tackling every aspect of public welfare, including environmental health, with his nightly patrols along. The coastline started to serve as a protector of both people and the environment rather than just a place for routine enforcement. Additionally, the local animal shelter saw an increase in community support led by Carla Martinez, a volunteer, helped the shelter grow and establish. Through collaborations with other rescue groups in the area, they conducted cleanup and educational sessions. The success of the shelter increasingly depended on drives and fundraising activities to guarantee that additional injured animals received prompt care. Evidence of the effectiveness of grassroots organizing showing that despite systematic neglect, investigative journalist Olivia Reed's collective action media outlets could be sparked by compassion, played a vital part in keeping the reform movement going and bringing the community together through a number of in-depth. Reed documented the events as they happened, starting with the chemical spill's discovery to the intense public dispute, and encapsulated the sentimental core of the community's hardship through multimedia. Characteristics that combine dramatic visuals, personal testimonies, and scientific data not only kept the public informed, but also maintained the pressure on government officials and business leaders to uphold openness and responsibility. Town hall meetings and community forums were frequent occurrences, offering a forum for locals to exchange stories and suggestions for protecting their surroundings during these events. People of various ages, from young campaigners to seasoned fishers, expressed their shared with the construct. One elderly resident's long-standing connection to the coast had been tarnished by industrialization, a sustainable future. I used to think that our voices were being drowned out when someone said neglect in a forum by corporate funds, but I now see that we can change things together. Her remarks struck a deep chord, encouraging more community involvement and municipal policy reforms after several months, Maplewood's coastline started to recover and more environmental regulations were enforced. Water quality and nearby marine life were gradually improved by restrictions and a thorough examination into the incident. Life began to improve. The change was gradual but evident, and every little advancement was they triumph over the elements that had before attempted to silence the weak in the quiet moments in the Maplewood Dog Park, where Bailey continued to sleep under the old oak tree. The locals discovered a potent representation of, once wounded by the harsh elements of nature, the young puppy's resilience was made worse. Every time a resident passed, the corporate negligence had turned into a beacon of Bailey and a focal point for change. They were reminded that compassion and solidarity could triumph even in the face of enormous hardship. To finish this chapter, we cordially invite you to join us in honoring the bravery and tenacity that changed a single sad incident into a movement for community healing and environmental justice. If you think that using kindness to inspire change, please subscribe to our channel, tell your friends and family about this story, and leave a comment describing to us how you have witnessed deeds of compassion transform the world. Thank you for participating. Keep tuned for more motivational tales that provide as a reminder that, despite our worst circumstances, Bailey is never really lost, and that by working together, we can create a brighter future for everybody.